We're letting you go, Janie, for performance.
You mean for not breaking the rules for you?
This is a termination meeting. Don't dress it up. You're lazy.
Fine. Hand over every password, now.
You just cut my access. I'm not allowed to touch systems anymore.
Stop playing smart.
I'm not playing. I'm obeying.
Yep.
Why is everything down? Why can't anyone log in? Fix it, Janie.
Because the work you called lazy was keeping your world quiet.
In writing.
Hand over every password. Now. Kyle's voice cracked on the last word. He was trying for authority, but Janie had been reading men like him for 40 years. The crack meant fear. She sat perfectly still in the ergonomic chair HR had finally approved after her third request. The fluorescent lights hummed. Across the table, Denise from Human Resources kept her eyes fixed on a manila folder like it contained nuclear codes instead of a termination checklist. "I'm sorry," Janie said, her voice calm as lake water. "Could you repeat that?" "The passwords." Kyle planted both palms on the conference table and leaned forward. He was 42, owned 3 polo shirts in rotation, and believed volume was a management strategy. Every system, every vendor account. Write them down. Janie glanced at Denise. "Is this part of the standard exit process?" Denise's pen stopped moving. She looked at Kyle, then back at her folder. "We typically have IT handle credential transfers before." "I am IT," Janie said quietly. "I'm the only IT." The room got very still. Kyle's jaw tightened. "You're being let go for performance issues. Specifically, for being lazy and unresponsive to urgent requests. This isn't a negotiation." Janie had been called a lot of things in 63 years. Stubborn, quiet, difficult. But lazy was new. Lazy was the word you used when someone wouldn't break the rules you needed broken. "I understand I'm being terminated," she said. "But per Section 4.2 of the Employee Handbook, the one you signed off on last March, once an employee's access is revoked, they're not authorized to interact with company systems. That includes providing credentials." She watched the information land. Kyle's left eye twitched. That's not what that means." "It's exactly what it means. Denise, do you have a copy of the handbook? Page 19, I believe." Denise looked like she wanted to disappear into the industrial carpet. "I can pull it up, but we don't need to pull anything up." Kyle's voice rose. "You're going to write down every password for every system you touched in the last 15 years, or I'm calling the police." Janie folded her hands on the table. Her wedding ring caught the light. 28 years married, 6 years widowed. Gerald would have laughed at this. He always said she was the only person he knew who could win a fight by refusing to throw a punch. "Kyle," she said, "I haven't refused anything. I followed policy." "Your policy. If you'd like, I can wait while someone from leadership reviews the handbook and provides written authorization for me to access systems post-termination." "I am leadership." "Then you can provide that in writing. I'll need it notarized, given the circumstances." His phone buzzed. He ignored it. "You think you're clever," he said. "You think because you've been here since before I bought this place, you can." His phone buzzed again. Then again. Then it didn't stop. Kyle pulled it from his pocket. Whatever he saw drained the color from his face. "What the hell is this?" The buzzing spread. Denise's phone lit up. Somewhere down the hall, Janie heard raised voices, the particular panic of people discovering that things had stopped working. "What did you do?" Kyle's voice was barely a whisper now. Janie stood. She was 5'4" and had stopped apologizing for taking up space sometime around the Reagan administration. "I didn't do anything. The shipping system is down. The phones are. Brenda says the warehouse can't print labels." "That's correct." "What did you do?" "Nothing." Janie picked up her purse, sensible, navy blue, bought at Kohl's with a 30% off coupon. "I stopped doing everything. There's a difference." She walked to the door. Her knees ached. They always did in the afternoon. But she kept her back straight. "You can't leave," Kyle said. This is sabotage. This is." This is what happens when one person holds every key and you fire them without a transition plan. She paused at the threshold. Per Section 6.1, all administrative credentials should be stored in the company's secure password vault with break glass backup accounts. I sent you 3 emails about setting that up. You replied to the first one with "too busy." You didn't reply to the others. I'll sue you. I'll have you arrested. Janie looked at him. Really looked. He was sweating now, his polo darkening under the arms. Behind him, Denise was furiously typing on her phone, probably trying to reach someone who could fix what couldn't be fixed by anyone in this building. You have my personal email if you need to reach me, Janie said. For consulting work. My rate is $200 an hour with a 4-hour minimum. Payment up front. I'll need that in writing. She left. The hallway was chaos. People clustered around dead screens, jabbing at phones that wouldn't connect. The coffee machine, which ran on the same network she'd warned them about 3 times, was making a sound like a dying animal. Brenda from shipping caught her arm. Janie, thank God. Everything's down, we can't. I don't work here anymore. What? Kyle just fired me. About 4 minutes ago. Janie gently removed Brenda's hand. Good luck. She walked through the front door and into the parking lot. February in Columbus meant gray sky and gray slush and the kind of cold that settled into your bones like a tenant who wouldn't leave. Her car was a 2012 Camry with a dent in the rear bumper from a shopping cart incident at Kroger. She'd never bothered to fix it. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands on the wheel. Then she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound exactly. It was the laugh of a woman who had arrived at 6 a.m. for 15 years, who had kept ancient systems running with duct tape and prayer, who had trained every new hire and answered every quick question, and skipped every lunch break because something was always on fire. Lazy. She started the car. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Mara Chen from KL Logistics. We need to talk. Janie stared at the message. Mara Chen, the efficiency consultant Kyle had hired 3 months ago. The one who'd been following Janie around with a clipboard, asking why certain processes took so long, suggesting streamlining opportunities with the bright confidence of someone who had never touched a legacy system in her life. The one who had recommended her termination. Another buzz. They're blaming you for something else too. It's bad. Please. Janie deleted both messages. Then, as she pulled out of the parking lot, her hands began to shake. The letter arrived 3 days later. Janie was at her kitchen table, sorting through the mail, grocery circulars, a dentist reminder, a birthday card from her sister in Akron that was 2 weeks early. The envelope from Kowalski and Associates looked expensive. Heavy cream paper, embossed letterhead, the kind of stationery that existed specifically to intimidate. She opened it with a butter knife. Dear Ms. Price, this firm represents KL Logistics, LLC. It has come to our attention that upon your termination, you retained company property including, but not limited to proprietary credentials, system access codes, and authentication devices. The letter went on for 2 pages. Words like tortious interference and willful sabotage and criminal referral floated up from the paragraphs like oil on water. The final line demanded she return all company property within 72 hours or face immediate legal action. Janie read it twice. Then she made herself a cup of tea. The thing about being 63 was that you'd already survived most of the things younger people were terrified of. She'd survived Gerald's diagnosis. She'd survived the 6 months after. She'd survived being the only woman in a server room full of men who called her sweetheart until she learned to make their computers forget their passwords. A threatening letter from a strip mall lawyer wasn't going to kill her, but it might complicate things. She pulled out her laptop, personal, never-touched work systems, and logged into her bank account. The direct deposit from KL Logistics had arrived. She checked the amount, then checked it again. $1,847.62. It should have been $2,340. She opened the calculator app and did the math. They'd shorted her almost $500. More importantly, they'd zeroed out her PTO balance. 86 hours she'd accrued over the last 2 years because Kyle had denied every vacation request as bad timing. That was her grandson's textbook money. That was her bridge to the next thing. Janie set down her teacup. Her hands weren't shaking this time. She pulled up her personal email and composed a message. Short, professional, the kind of note she'd learned to write after decades of dealing with people who'd use any excess word as a weapon. To whom it may concern, I am in receipt of your letter dated February 14th. I'm happy to discuss any concerns regarding company property. However, I note that my final paycheck appears to be missing approximately $493 in regular wages, as well as 86 hours of accrued PTO, as documented in my records. Additionally, I remain available for consulting services related to system transition at my standard rate of $200 per hour. All communications should be in writing. Regards, Janet Price. She sent it to both the lawyer and Kyle's direct email, then CC'd Denise in HR. Documentation was everything. Documentation was the only weapon that couldn't be taken away. Her phone buzzed. Another text from the number she'd blocked. Please. I know you're ignoring me. Check your LinkedIn. Janie didn't have LinkedIn. She'd created a profile once, in 2009, and hadn't touched it since. But curiosity was a persistent itch. She logged in. 3 connection requests from people she didn't know, 2 messages from recruiters, and a notification that made her stomach drop. KL Logistics has shared an update. Important notice regarding recent IT security incident. She clicked through. The post was careful. No names. But it didn't need names. Following the departure of a long-term IT employee, KL Logistics experienced a significant systems disruption. We are working with cybersecurity professionals to assess whether this incident involved unauthorized access or intentional interference. We take the security of our clients' data seriously and will pursue all available remedies. We thank our partners for their patience during this transition. 47 likes. 12 comments. Most were supportive. So sorry to hear this. Colin, let us know if you need anything. But a few were pointed. Sounds like someone didn't plan for succession got 3 laughs before being deleted. Janie read it again. Long-term IT employee. Unauthorized access. Intentional interference. He was building a narrative. She was the villain in it. Her phone rang. Real ring, not a text. She didn't recognize the number, but it was local. Hello. Mrs. Price. A young woman's voice, professional but nervous. This is Detective Nguyen with the Columbus Division of Police. Do you have a moment to talk? Janie's heart stuttered, then steadied. What is this regarding? We've received a report from KL Logistics about a potential computer crime. I want to be clear. You're not under arrest, and you're not being charged with anything at this time. But I'd like to ask you a few questions if you're willing. Am I required to answer? A pause. No, ma'am. You're not. Then I'll need to consult with an attorney first. Is there a number where I can reach you? She wrote down the information, thanked the detective politely, and hung up. Then she sat very still for a long time. The knock came at 7 that evening. Janie had spent the afternoon cleaning, not because she needed to, but because cleaning was thinking and thinking was planning. She'd scrubbed the bathroom tile until it gleamed. She'd reorganized her spice cabinet. She'd called her nephew who practiced family law in Cincinnati, and he'd given her a name. Ruth Castellano, employment attorney. Mean as a snake, but fair. She hadn't called Ruth yet. She wasn't sure she could afford Ruth. The knock was hesitant. 3 quick raps, then nothing. Janie looked through the peephole. Mara-chan stood on her porch, coat pulled tight against the cold, a canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder. She considered not answering. But curiosity, again, that persistent itch. She opened the door. I blocked your number. I know. Mara's face was drawn, dark circles under her eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go. You could try your employer. They're not. Mara stopped. Swallowed. Can I come in? Please. 5 minutes. Janie studied her. 28, maybe 30. MBA from somewhere respectable, probably. The kind of young woman who used words like synergy and bandwidth without irony. The kind of young woman who had looked at Janie's processes and seen inefficiency instead of survival. The kind of young woman who had told Kyle that Janie's position could be optimized. 5 minutes, Janie said, and stepped aside. Mara came in, stamping slush off her boots. She looked around the living room, Gerald's old recliner, the photos on the mantel, the bookshelves stuffed with paperbacks and technical manuals, and something in her face shifted. Surprise, maybe, like she'd expected something else. You have a nice home. You didn't come here to compliment my decorating. No. Mara sat on the edge of the couch, clutching her tote bag like a life preserver. I came to tell you that Kyle is lying, and I can prove it. Janie lowered herself into Gerald's recliner. The leather creaked. Go on. He told me you were stealing. That's why I recommended your termination. He said you were skimming from vendor accounts, that you'd set up fake invoices, that you were the reason the books never balanced. Mara's voice wavered. I believed him. I had no reason not to. I'd been there 3 months, and he seemed confident. Yes. Loud. Yes. Janie nodded slowly. Here's your first office truth, since nobody else is going to tell you. The loudest person in the room is usually hiding the mess. What changed your mind? Mara reached into her tote bag and pulled out a manila folder. I found these. She handed them over. Janie opened the folder and went very still. Time cards. Dozens of them. Screenshots showing entries being modified, hours deleted, overtime zeroed out, dates shifted. Her name was on some of them. Other names too. Brenda from shipping. Marcus from receiving. Lena, the part-time bookkeeper who'd quit last summer. He made you change these, Janie said. It wasn't a question. He made me log in and do it. Said it was correcting input errors. Mara's voice cracked. But I saved copies. I didn't know why. I had a feeling. Janie looked at her. Really looked. The nervousness was real. So was the guilt. Why are you showing me this? Mara met her eyes. Because he's about to do the same thing to the system logs. The ones that show what really happened when you got fired. And if those disappear, you're the only story anyone will ever hear. Janie closed the folder. 5 minutes are up, she said. But you can stay for dinner. Mara ate like someone who'd forgotten how. Janie watched her work through a bowl of leftover chicken soup. Nothing fancy, just the kind you made on Sundays when the week ahead looked long and said nothing. Some silences needed to breathe. Gerald used to say that. He'd been a talker, her husband, but he understood the weight of quiet. When the bowl was empty, Mara set down her spoon and stared at the table. I got my MBA in 18 months, she said. Accelerated program. Everyone told me I was impressive. I'm sure you were. I thought I knew things. Mara laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Process optimization. Workflow efficiency. Cost per employee ratios. I had spreadsheets for everything. Spreadsheets are useful. Spreadsheets don't tell you when someone's lying to your face. Mara looked up. He was so convincing. Kyle. When he talked about you, he seemed genuinely hurt. Like you'd betrayed him personally. Janie carried the bowl to the sink and ran water over it. Through the kitchen window, she could see her neighbor's porch light flickering. She'd been meaning to tell him about it. The ballast was probably going. What exactly did he say? that you'd been there too long, that you'd built yourself into every system on purpose so no one could fire you, that you'd been padding invoices for years and he finally had proof. And you believed him. I didn't have a reason not to. Mara's voice was small. I'd known him for 3 months. I'd known you for 3 months. The difference was he talked to me. You barely looked at me. Janie turned off the water. That was fair. She hadn't looked at Mara, not really. She'd seen a clipboard and a threat and the particular kind of efficiency that meant someone was about to lose their job. She'd seen a dozen women like Mara over the years, young and sharp and convinced that everything old was broken. I've been doing this for a long time, Janie said. You learn to recognize when someone's measuring you for a coffin. I wasn't. You were. You just didn't know whose hand was on the tape measure. She dried her hands on a dish towel and sat back down. Show me everything. Mara pulled more papers from her tote bag. Janie spread them across the table like a surgeon examining x-rays. The time cards were damning, but they were just the surface. Beneath them were screenshots of emails. Kyle instructing Mara to clean up the overtime entries. Kyle telling her which employees were gaming the system. Kyle casually mentioning that the Department of Labor didn't audit companies their size. He put all of this in writing? He puts everything in writing. I think he likes having a record of giving orders. That's useful. Janie flipped to the next page. What's this? It was a system log. Dense columns of timestamps, IP addresses, user actions. Mara leaned over and pointed to a highlighted section. That's from the day you were fired. See this entry? That's your admin account being used to access the vendor payment portal. At 4:47 p.m. Janie frowned. I was in the termination meeting at 4:47 with Kyle and Denise. I know. The implications settled over the table like frost. Someone logged in as me, Janie said slowly, after I was already fired, using credentials I never gave anyone. Not just logged in. They ran a payment, $12,000 to a company called North Shore Consulting. I've never heard of North Shore Consulting. Neither had I. So I looked it up. Mara pulled out one more page. A business registration from the Ohio Secretary of State's website. North Shore Consulting LLC was registered 8 months ago. The registered agent is Kyle's brother-in-law. Janie stared at the paper. In 37 years of IT work, she'd seen a lot. She'd seen people steal office supplies and expense reports and other people's lunches from the break room fridge. She'd seen a CFO embezzle $200,000 over 6 years through fake vendor accounts. She'd seen a manager fake his own death to avoid a harassment investigation. But she'd never seen someone build a frame this elegant. He's not just blaming me for the outage, she said. He's setting me up for embezzlement. He needs a scapegoat. The company's been bleeding money for 2 years. I saw the real books, not the ones he shows investors, the actual ones. There may be 6 months from insolvency. If his lenders find out, if his insurance company audits, he's done. So he makes me the story. Crazy old IT lady goes rogue, steals money, crashes systems, holds passwords hostage. It's perfect. You or Mara stopped. I'm what? You're easy to believe. Because you're old, quiet, forgettable. Mara winced. I was going to say invisible, but yes. Janie gathered the papers into a neat stack. Her hands were steady. Funny how that worked. The bigger the threat, the calmer she got. Gerald used to call it her hurricane mode. There's something you need to understand, she said. I'm not broke. I'm not helpless. I've been consulting on the side for 11 years. Cash in an account Kyle doesn't know about. I have documentation for everything. Every email he ignored, every policy violation I reported, every system failure I predicted and he dismissed. I kept it all because I've worked for men like Kyle before. They always think they're the first. Mara blinked. You knew this was coming? I knew something was coming. I didn't know the shape of it. Janie tapped the stack of papers. Now I do. So what do? We don't do anything. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. Mara's voice sharpened. I helped him fire you. I changed those time cards. If this goes to court, I'm complicit. If it goes to the Department of Labor, I'm complicit. He made sure of that. Then you should be protecting yourself, not helping me. Maybe they're the same thing. Mara leaned forward. I know you don't trust me. I know you think I'm just some MBA with a clipboard who doesn't understand how things really work. And maybe you're right. But I'm also the person with access to his systems for another. She checked her phone. 12 days, until my contract ends. I can get more. The real logs. The real books. Whatever you need. That could be considered theft. Only if I take them. If I just look at them. And happen to remember what I see. And happen to write it down later, on my own time, on my own computer. Janie studied her. The nervousness was still there, but something else had joined it. Something harder. Why? Janie asked. Why risk this? Mara was quiet for a long moment. My grandmother worked in a factory for 43 years, she said finally. Sewing machine operator. She never missed a day, never complained, never asked for anything except what she was owed. When the factory closed, they told her the pension fund was empty, that someone had mismanaged it, that there was nothing they could do. What happened? She died 3 years later, in my mother's spare bedroom, with nothing. Mara's jaw tightened. I got my MBA because I wanted to understand how places like that worked, how the money moved, how the decisions got made. I thought if I understood it, I could stop it from happening to anyone else. And instead you helped Kyle do it to me. Yes. The word hung in the air. And I have to fix that. Not because I'm a good person, I'm honestly not sure about that anymore. But because I can't be the person who just walks away. Janie thought about Gerald. About the day he'd come home from the auto plant and told her they'd offered him a buyout. Early retirement, decent package, but only if he signed a paper saying he wouldn't talk about the safety violations he'd reported. He'd turned it down. They'd fired him 6 months later for insubordination. He never regretted it. Not once. Not even at the end. All right, Janie said. But we do this my way. No hacking. No theft. Nothing that gives him ammunition. Then how? We let his own policies do the work. Janie pulled a legal pad from the kitchen drawer and began writing. Step 1. I file a wage complaint with the Ohio Department of Commerce. Unpaid overtime, stolen PTO. That triggers an investigation. He'll lawyer up. He already has. But wage complaints aren't criminal. They're administrative. Different rules, different burden of proof. She kept writing. Step 2. I send a preservation letter to his attorney, informing them that any destruction of electronic records related to my employment may constitute spoliation of evidence. Will that stop him from deleting things? No, but it'll make it much worse for him if he does. Janie looked up. Step 3. I report the improper credential usage to their compliance contact, the one they're required to have under their contract with Jefferson Medical. Mara's eyes widened. How do you know about Jefferson Medical? I set up that contract. I know every clause, including the one that requires them to maintain proper access controls and report any unauthorized system access within 48 hours. Janie smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. They haven't reported anything, because Kyle thinks he can make this go away before anyone notices. And if you report it, then Jefferson Medical has to audit them. And Kyle has to explain why my credentials were used after I was terminated, and why there's no documentation of proper access controls, and why the break glass accounts I recommended 3 times in writing don't exist. Mara sat back. You've been planning this. I've been surviving this. There's a difference. Janie set down her pen. Now, you said he's about to delete the system logs. How long do we have? He told me to archive them by end of week. That's Friday. Then we have 3 days. Janie tore the page from the legal pad and handed it to Mara. Don't make copies of anything. Don't email anything. Don't do anything that leaves a trail. Just look. And remember. Mara folded the paper carefully. What are you going to do? I'm going to call a lawyer. And then I'm going to send a very polite email. She walked Mara to the door. The night air was sharp, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache. Mrs. Price. Janie, if we're doing this, you might as well use my name. Mara nodded. Janie, he's going to come after you harder when he realizes you're fighting back. I know. Doesn't that scare you? Janie thought about it. The police call. The lawyer's letter. The LinkedIn post painting her as a saboteur. The $12,000 sitting in a fake company account with her fingerprints carefully arranged around it. I've been scared before, she said. It's not a good enough reason to stop. Mara stepped off the porch, then turned back. My grandmother used to say something. In Cantonese. Roughly translated, it means the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. We have that saying too. She also used to say that sometimes the nail goes through the hammer. Janie smiled. I like your grandmother. You would have. Mara disappeared into the dark. Janie closed the door and stood in her quiet house. Gerald's recliner sat empty in the living room. The photos on the mantel showed a life, her life, in fragments. Wedding day, graduation, the grandkids at Christmas. She picked up her phone and dialed Ruth Castellano's number. It was time to become a nail. Ruth Castellano's office smelled like coffee and old paper. It was a small space on the 3rd floor of a building that had probably been impressive in 1987, with paneling, brass fixtures, the kind of carpet that absorbed decades of footsteps and whispered conversations. Ruth herself was somewhere north of 70, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and reading glasses perpetually perched on her forehead like she'd forgotten they were there. So, Ruth said, flipping through the stack of documents Janie had brought. You're telling me this man fired you, accused you of sabotage, reported you to the police, and is actively framing you for embezzlement. And you want to know if you have a case. I want to know if I can win without losing everything. Ruth laughed. It was a sharp sound, like a bark. Honey, I've been doing this for 42 years. Nobody wins without losing something. The question is what you're willing to pay. Janie had expected that. She'd also expected the retainer Ruth quoted, $4,000 up front, more if it went to litigation. The number sat in her stomach like a stone. I can do $2,500 now, she said. The rest in 30 days. You have documentation? Everything. Every email, every policy violation report, every ignored recommendation. Time-stamped, backed up, organized by date. Ruth's eyebrows rose. You kept all that. I've worked for men like Kyle before. Smart woman. Ruth set down the papers and leaned back in her chair. Here's what I see. You've got a strong wage claim. Unpaid overtime, stolen PTO, that's straightforward. The Department of Commerce takes those seriously. Fines, back pay, maybe penalties if he's done it to others. He has. I saw the time cards. Good. That's a pattern. Ruth pulled off her reading glasses and chewed on one arm. The sabotage accusation is trickier. He's got no evidence because there is no evidence. You didn't do anything. But crazy IT lady crashes systems is an easy story to sell. People believe it because they want to believe it. What about the embezzlement frame? That's where it gets interesting. Ruth picked up the business registration for North Shore Consulting. If he really did set up a shell company and run a payment through your credentials after you were terminated, that's fraud. Wire fraud, potentially. The kind of thing that makes federal prosecutors perk up their ears. I don't want him in prison. I want my name back. Sometimes you can't separate those things. Ruth set down the paper. What's your endgame here, Janet? Money? Apology? Watching him burn. Janie had thought about this question all night. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. I want what I'm owed, she said finally. Wages, PTO, damages. I want a neutral reference so this doesn't follow me. And I want the record to show what actually happened. Not his version. The truth. The truth. Ruth smiled, but there was something sad in it. That's the most expensive thing on the menu. Can you get it? I can try. First step is the preservation letter. We send that today. Put his lawyers on notice that if any records disappear, we'll argue spoliation of evidence. Second step is the wage complaint. Third step, we wait. For what? For him to make a mistake. Men like Kyle always do. They're so convinced they're the smartest person in the room, they can't imagine getting caught. Ruth stood and extended her hand. $2,500. I'll have my assistant draw up the engagement letter. Janie was halfway home when her phone buzzed. A text from Mara. Something happened. Can you come to my apartment? 20 minutes later, Janie was climbing the stairs of a building in German Village. Old brick, narrow hallways. The kind of place young professionals rented when they wanted character without commitment. Mara opened the door before she could knock. She looked terrible, not crying. Janie got the sense Mara wasn't much of a crier, but hollowed out. Dark circles under her eyes, hair escaping from its usual neat ponytail, a cardigan buttoned wrong. What happened? Mara stepped back to let her in. The apartment was small but tidy, decorated in the impersonal way of someone who hadn't quite decided if they were staying. A laptop sat open on the kitchen table, screen dark. He called me into his office this morning, Mara said. Closed the door. Thanked me for my work. Told me my contract was being terminated early due to budgetary constraints. Janie lowered herself onto the couch. He fired you. Effective immediately. Security walked me out. I didn't even get to clear my desk. They said they'd mail me my things. Mara laughed, a brittle sound. 12 days. I had 12 days left. He couldn't even wait. He knew, or suspected, that you turned. Maybe. Or maybe I was always disposable, and he just didn't need me anymore. Mara sat on the floor, back against the wall, like she couldn't quite manage a chair. He gave me a speech about how the company was in a difficult transition and they needed to right size. He used the word synergy 3 times. I counted. Did he say anything about me? Not directly, but when I was leaving, he said something weird. He said, I hope you'll think carefully about who you associate with going forward. Reputation is everything in this business. Mara met Janie's eyes. It was a threat, wasn't it? Yes. What do I do? Right now? Nothing. You go home. Well, you're home. You take a breath. You don't contact anyone from the company. Don't post anything online. Don't do anything that gives him a reason to come after you. And then we see what cards we're holding. Mara pulled her knees to her chest. For a moment, she looked very young. I called my parents. After, my mom cried. My dad asked if I'd done something wrong. She shook her head. 28 years old, and I still can't handle disappointing them. Janie thought about her own parents. Both gone now, her mother 15 years ago, her father 3 years before Gerald. They'd never understood her work. Computers were mysterious boxes that sometimes printed things, but they'd understood labor. The value of showing up. The dignity of doing your job well. You didn't do anything wrong, she said. You trusted someone who lied to you. That's not a character flaw. That's being human. It feels like a character flaw. Most things do at the beginning. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, a siren wailed past. The afternoon light was fading, turning the apartment gray. I got the logs, Mara said quietly. What? Before he fired me. Last night. I couldn't sleep, so I went into the office. Used my access while I still had it. I didn't copy anything. I remembered what you said. But I looked, and I wrote it all down. Here. She reached under the couch and pulled out a composition notebook, the kind you'd buy at CVS for $2, black and white marbled cover. She handed it to Janie. The pages were dense with handwriting. Timestamps, IP addresses, transaction records, names of files, names of folders, names of accounts. This is everything. Everything I could find. The real logs. The ones that show your account being accessed after termination. The payment to North Shore. The time card changes going back 18 months. Mara swallowed. And something else. Something I didn't expect. Janie turned to a page Mara had marked with a post-it note. That's the audit trail for the main server. The one that runs the shipping system, the phones, everything. Look at the access log for February 12th. 2 days before your termination. Janie looked, and then she understood. He logged in as himself, she said slowly, and ran a full backup of the system. A backup that he then deleted from the automated schedule, which means he has a copy of everything, exactly as it was before I was fired. Janie stared at the page. He could restore the systems anytime he wanted. The outage was never about me. It was about creating a crisis he could blame on me. And when the crisis got too expensive, when clients started asking questions, he could just fix it and claim he'd found a workaround or hired a specialist. While I take the blame for the damage. While you take the blame for everything. Janie closed the notebook. She'd thought she understood what Kyle was doing. She'd thought it was simple greed, simple cruelty, the kind of petty malice she'd seen 100 times before. But this was something else. This was architecture. A carefully constructed house of lies with her name on the foundation. There's something you should know, Mara said. I didn't just write things down. I mailed a copy to myself. Handwritten pages, not digital. It's sitting in my P.O. box right now. Postmarked before he fired me. That's risky. I know. But if something happens to this notebook, if he finds out what I have, there's still a record. Somewhere he can't reach. Janie looked at her. This young woman who'd helped destroy her career, who'd believed the lies, who'd pushed for her termination. This young woman who was now risking everything to make it right. Why did you really come to my house that first night? Mara was quiet for a long moment. Because when he told me to archive the logs, he smiled. This little smile, like he'd won something. And I realized I'd seen that smile before. On every boss who'd ever taken credit for someone else's work. On every man who'd ever told me I was impressive for a woman. On my grandmother's factory supervisor, in an old photo she kept. Mara's voice hardened. I know what that smile means. It means someone's about to get away with something. And you decided they wouldn't. I decided I'd at least make it harder. Janie stood, the notebook tucked under her arm. I have to get this to my lawyer. Can you write up a summary? Timeline. Key events. Anything that helps make sense of these logs for someone who doesn't speak IT. Already done. Back of the notebook. Good. Janie paused at the door. Do you have savings? Enough to get by for a few months? Some. Not a lot. Janie reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She'd brought it just in case. $300 in 20s, the emergency cash she kept in her desk drawer at home. Take this. I can't. You can. And you will. Consider it in advance on consulting services. Janie pressed the envelope into Mara's hand. There's a chance this goes badly. A chance he wins, we lose, and none of this matters. But if we're going to fight, I'd rather not do it alone. And I'd rather you not starve while we're doing it. Mara stared at the envelope, then at Janie. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. My grandmother would have liked you too, she said. Then we would have gotten along. Janie walked out into the evening air. The temperature was dropping again, February refusing to release its grip. She climbed into her Camry and sat for a moment, the notebook on the passenger seat beside her. Gerald's voice floated up from somewhere in her memory. The hardest thing about fighting isn't throwing punches. It's knowing when to let someone fight beside you. She started the car and drove toward Ruth Castellano's office. The nail was ready. Now it was time to find the hammer. The email arrived on a Tuesday. Janie was at her kitchen table, working through a freelance project for a dental office in Westerville. Nothing glamorous, just migrating their patient records to a new system. But it paid, and it kept her mind occupied. Her laptop dinged. She glanced at the notification. From Legal Department, KL Logistics Subject. Final notice. Return of company property and cease all defamatory activity. She opened it. The message was 3 pages long, dense with legal language, bristling with threats. But the core of it was simple. Kyle's lawyers were claiming that Janie had initiated a campaign of harassment and defamation against their client. They cited the wage complaint. They cited the preservation letter. They cited communications with third parties designed to damage the reputation of KL Logistics and its leadership. The final paragraph was the knife. Furthermore, we have obtained evidence that Ms. Price retained unauthorized copies of proprietary company data and has shared this information with former employees in violation of her confidentiality agreement. We demand the immediate return of all such materials and reserve the right to pursue criminal charges for theft of trade secrets. Janie read it twice. Then she called Ruth. I saw it, Ruth said before Janie could speak. Got CC'd 20 minutes ago. They're escalating. They're lying. I never signed a confidentiality agreement. I asked for one 3 times because I wanted clarity on what I could and couldn't discuss after retirement. Kyle never bothered. Do you have that in writing? I have the emails where I requested it, and the lack of any signed agreement in my personnel file. Good. That's good. Ruth's voice was calm, but Janie could hear the edge underneath. Here's what's happening. Kyle knows we're building a case. He knows the wage complaint is going to trigger an investigation. So he's trying to reframe the narrative. Make it look like you're the aggressor, he's the victim, and everything we're doing is retaliation for your termination. Will it work? It might. With the right judge, the right jury, the right story. Disgruntled employee goes scorched earth is an easy sell. Ruth paused. There's something else. I got a call this morning from a reporter at the Columbus Dispatch. Someone tipped them off about a cybersecurity incident at KL Logistics. They're working on a story. Janie's stomach dropped. Did they mention my name? Not yet, but they will. These things always leak. I didn't talk to any reporter. I know, but Kyle doesn't know that. And if this story runs, he'll assume you're the source, which gives him another weapon. Janie closed her laptop. The dental office could wait. What do? We accelerate. I'm filing the formal complaint with the Department of Commerce today. I'm also sending a letter to Jefferson Medical's compliance department, informing them of the credential misuse. And I'm reaching out to a forensic accountant I know, someone who can look at the North Shore Consulting payment and trace it properly. How much will that cost? More than you want to spend. But if we can prove Kyle set up that shell company and ran money through your credentials, this stops being a he said, she said. It becomes fraud. And fraud changes everything. Janie thought about her savings. The consulting account she'd built over 11 years, dollar by dollar, project by project. It was supposed to be her safety net, her freedom fund, the money that meant she'd never have to depend on anyone else's mercy. Do it, she said. The next 3 days were quiet. Too quiet. Janie kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Another legal threat. A call from the police, something. But there was nothing. Just silence and the slow grinding of bureaucratic machinery. She used the time to organize. Every document, every email, every scrap of evidence went into a binder, then a backup binder, then a digital folder on an encrypted drive. She created a timeline, color-coded by category. Wage theft in red, credential misuse in blue, the North Shore payment in green. Gerald would have laughed at her. He always said she organized things when she was scared, the same way some people cleaned or cooked or ran. You're not solving the problem, he'd say. You're just giving it a filing system. But filing systems had saved her before. Documentation was the only weapon that couldn't be taken away. On Friday morning, Mara called. Have you seen LinkedIn? Janie hadn't. She'd stopped checking after the first post, unwilling to watch Kyle's narrative spread. Just tell me. He posted again about the ongoing investigation into former employee misconduct. He's tagged the Columbus Business Journal, the Chamber of Commerce, 3 of his biggest clients. And Mara's voice cracked. He's named you. Not directly, but close enough. A 15-year IT veteran whose termination revealed significant financial irregularities. That's a quote. Janie sat down. He's going public. He's controlling the story. By the time anyone investigates, everyone will already believe him. Mara's breathing was ragged. It gets worse. I got a call this morning from a number I didn't recognize. It was a lawyer, not Kyle's lawyer, someone else. He said he represented concerned parties and wanted to discuss my potential exposure in the KL logistics situation. He suggested I might want to reconsider my associations before things got complicated. That's a threat. I know. I hung up. But Janie, Mara's voice was very small. My mom called after. Someone reached out to her, told her I was involved in a corporate fraud investigation. She was crying. She asked if I was going to prison. The silence stretched. Are you okay? No. A long breath. But I'm not quitting either. I just needed you to know what we're dealing with. I know what we're dealing with. I've known since the beginning. Then why are you still fighting? Janie looked around her kitchen. The dish towel hanging on the oven handle, the same spot Gerald always left it. The coffee mug she'd bought on their trip to Gatlinburg, faded now, but still her favorite. The window over the sink, looking out at a yard she'd mowed herself for 6 years because hiring someone felt like giving up. Because stopping won't make it better, she said. If I quit now, Kyle wins. The story becomes true. I'm the crazy IT lady who stole money and crashed systems and got what she deserved. Every reference check for the rest of my life turns up, terminated for cause, under investigation. My grandson asks what happened to Grandma's job, and I have to lie or explain that I let a man like Kyle write my ending. But if we keep fighting and lose, then at least the truth is on record. Somewhere. Even if no one believes it today. Janie's grip tightened on the phone. I'm 63 years old. I've got maybe 20 good years left, maybe less. I'm not spending them being someone's cautionary tale. Mara was quiet for a long moment. Okay, she said finally. Okay, what's next? Next, I send an email. Janie composed it carefully. No anger, no accusations, nothing that could be used against her. Just facts, policy citations, and a question that Kyle couldn't answer without incriminating himself. Dear Mr. Kowalski, I am writing in response to your client's recent public statements regarding my employment and termination. As you are aware, per Section 4.2 of the KL Logistics Employee Handbook, terminated employees are prohibited from accessing company systems or providing credentials post-termination. I complied fully with this policy. Additionally, per Section 6.1, all administrative credentials must be stored in the company's secure password vault, with break-glass backup accounts maintained for emergency access. I submitted written recommendations regarding this requirement on March 15th, July 8th, and October 22nd of last year. These recommendations were not implemented. Finally, per Section 8.3, any use of employee credentials after termination must be documented and reported to the compliance officer within 48 hours. I am unaware of any such report being filed regarding the use of my credentials on February 14th, Despite system logs indicating access from my account at 4:47 p.m., a time when I was physically present in a termination meeting with your client and the HR representative. I remain willing to cooperate with any legitimate investigation into these matters. However, I must note that the continued public statements attributing misconduct to me without evidence may constitute defamation per se under Ohio law. Please confirm receipt of this message. Regards, Janet Price. She CC'd Ruth. She CC'd the compliance contact at Jefferson Medical. She CC'd the auditor whose name she'd found in the vendor contract files, a woman named Patricia Hendricks who worked for an outside firm and had signed off on KL Logistics security practices 2 years ago. Then she hit send. The response came faster than she expected. Not from Kyle's lawyer. From Patricia Hendricks. Ms. Price, thank you for bringing these matters to my attention. I have reviewed your email and the policy sections you cited. I would like to schedule a call at your earliest convenience to discuss. Please contact my office directly. Patricia Hendricks, Senior Compliance Auditor, Midwest Security Associates. Janie stared at the screen. She called Ruth. The auditor replied. Already? What did she say? She wants to talk. Today, if possible. Ruth was silent for a moment. That's fast. That's very fast. Auditors don't move that quickly unless something's already wrong. What do you mean? I mean, she might have been looking at KL Logistics before your email arrived. Your message might have just confirmed something she already suspected. Ruth's voice sharpened. Don't talk to her without me on the line. I'll clear my afternoon. Can you be at my office at 3? I'll be there. The call lasted 47 minutes. Patricia Hendricks was precise, professional, and very careful not to reveal anything she didn't have to. But Janie had been reading between lines for 37 years, and Ruth was even better at it. What they pieced together was this. Jefferson Medical had received an anonymous tip 3 weeks ago about potential HIPAA violations at KL Logistics. The tip mentioned improper access controls, shared credentials, and possible credential misuse following employee terminations. Patricia had been assigned to investigate. She'd requested documentation from Kyle. He'd stalled. She'd requested system logs. He'd claimed they were being compiled. She'd requested the employee handbook and security policies. He'd sent a version that was missing several sections. Janie's email had filled in the gaps. I can't tell you what our findings will be, Patricia said carefully. But I can tell you that your documentation is comprehensive, and it raises questions that will require answers. What kind of questions? The kind that involve lawyers, and possibly law enforcement. A pause. I'd recommend you preserve all your records. Don't delete anything. Don't modify anything. If this proceeds the way I think it might, you'll want everything exactly as it is. After they hung up, Ruth sat back in her chair. Well, she said, that's not nothing. It's not a win either. No, it's a door. What's behind it depends on what Patricia finds and what she decides to do with it. Ruth looked at Janie. But here's what I know. Kyle just lost control of this. He thought he was managing a narrative. Now he's managing an investigation. Those are very different things. Janie nodded. She should have felt relieved. Vindicated, maybe. Instead, she felt tired. What happens now? Now we wait. And we hope Kyle does what men like Kyle always do. Which is... Ruth smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Panic. Kyle panicked. It took 11 days. Janie spent those days in a strange kind of limbo, working her freelance projects, cooking meals she barely tasted, waiting for a phone call or an email or a knock on the door that would tell her which way the wind was blowing. She slept poorly. She dreamed about servers crashing, about Gerald's voice saying something she couldn't quite hear, about walking into KL Logistics and finding every desk empty. Mara checked in every other day, brief texts that said little but meant everything. Still here. Still okay. Any news? Not yet, Janie would reply. Hold steady. On the 12th day, Ruth called. Kyle's lawyer just sent a settlement offer. Janie set down her coffee cup. What kind of offer? The kind that tells me he's scared. Ruth's voice was crisp, professional, but Janie could hear the satisfaction underneath. He's offering full back pay, all accrued PTO, plus 3 months severance. In exchange, you sign an NDA and agree not to pursue any further legal action. What about the defamation? The fraud accusations? The police report? He'll withdraw the complaint, issue a clarifying statement that you were not involved in any misconduct, and provide a neutral reference. And the North Shore payment? Not mentioned, which tells me he's hoping you don't know about it, or that you'll take the money and walk away before it becomes an issue. Janie stood and walked to the window. The February sky was finally breaking, pale blue showing through the gray. A cardinal sat on the fence post, red against the dirty snow. What do you think I should do? That depends on what you want. Ruth paused. This is a decent offer. Not great, but decent. You'd get what you're owed, you'd get your name cleared, mostly, and you'd be done. No more lawyers, no more stress, no more wondering what comes next. But you'd also be letting him buy his way out. The wage theft, the fraud, the credential misuse. None of that gets exposed. He pays a fine, maybe, gets a slap on the wrist from Jefferson Medical. Learns to be more careful next time. Ruth's voice hardened. Men like Kyle don't stop. They just get smarter about hiding it. Janie watched the cardinal. It turned its head, looking at something she couldn't see, then flew away. What happens if I say no? Then we push forward. The wage complaint is already in process. That'll take months, but it's solid. The compliance audit is ongoing. Patricia Hendricks hasn't told me what she's found, but she's still digging, which means there's something to find. And the forensic accountant finished her preliminary review yesterday. What did she find? North Shore Consulting received 4 payments over the last 8 months. $12,000, $8,000, $15,000, and $6,000. All routed through vendor accounts that you had access to, but so did Kyle. The account that received the money was closed 2 weeks ago, right after you were fired. The funds were transferred to a personal account belonging to Kyle's brother-in-law. Janie closed her eyes. That's embezzlement. That's wire fraud. Federal crime. 5 to 20 years if convicted. Ruth let that hang in the air. If we report this to the FBI, Kyle doesn't just lose his company. He loses everything. And if we don't, then he walks away, pays you off, shuts up, and moves on to the next person he can exploit. Janie thought about the cardinal, about Gerald and the buyout he'd refused, about her grandmother, who'd worked in a textile mill for 30 years and never complained because complaining meant losing the job that fed her children, about Mara's grandmother, dying in a spare bedroom with nothing. I don't want him in prison, she said slowly. I told you that at the beginning. I still mean it. Then what do you want? I want the truth on record. I want everyone who works for him to know what he did. I want his clients, his investors, his family to see the real books and the real logs and the real story. She turned away from the window. I want him to lose the thing he cares about most, which is control. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. All right, she said. Then here's what we do. The meeting was held at Ruth's office. Kyle didn't come. His lawyer said he was unavailable, but Denise from HR was there, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. So was a man Janie didn't recognize, introduced as the company's outside counsel from a bigger firm downtown. And so was Patricia Hendricks, sitting in the corner with a thick folder and an expression that gave nothing away. Ruth laid it out simply. The wage complaint had uncovered a pattern of time card manipulation going back 18 months, affecting at least 7 employees. The total amount of unpaid overtime and stolen PTO exceeded $40,000. The compliance audit had found critical failures in access control, credential management, and incident reporting. KL Logistics was in breach of their contract with Jefferson Medical and two other major clients. The forensic review had traced the North Shore payments and documented the connection to Kyle's brother-in-law. And Janie had a notebook full of handwritten notes, time-stamped and postmarked, corroborating everything. "My client is prepared to accept a settlement," Ruth said. "But not the one you offered." The outside counsel leaned forward. "What does she want?" "Full back pay and PTO for my client, plus 6 months severance." A public statement, not a clarifying statement. A public acknowledgement that Janet Price was terminated without cause and was not involved in any misconduct. A neutral reference. And the same settlement for every employee affected by the time card manipulation. I'm not finished." Ruth's voice was ice. "My client also requires that Mr. Kowalski step down from operational control of KL Logistics and submit to an independent audit of all company finances. The results of that audit will be shared with Jefferson Medical, the Ohio Department of Commerce, and any other relevant regulatory bodies." Denise's face went white. The outside counsel's jaw tightened. "That's not a settlement," he said. "That's a hostile takeover. That's accountability." Ruth slid a folder across the table. "These are the forensic accountant's findings. I suggest you review them before you respond. Because if my client doesn't get what she's asking for, this goes to the FBI. And then nobody's negotiating anything." The room was very quiet. Patricia Hendricks spoke for the first time. "I should note that my report to Jefferson Medical will include all relevant findings, regardless of the outcome of this meeting. Their contract with KL Logistics is already under review." The outside counsel looked at Denise. Denise looked at the table. "We'll need to consult with our client," the counsel said finally. "You have 48 hours. Ruth stood. "After that, my client makes her own decisions about what to report and to whom." Kyle agreed. Not to everything. He fought the public statement, tried to water it down, negotiated the severance amounts. But in the end, faced with the forensic report and the compliance audit and the very real possibility of federal charges, he folded. The settlement was signed on a Thursday afternoon in early March. Janie got her back pay, her PTO, 6 months severance, a letter acknowledging that her termination was without cause and that she had served the company with integrity. The 7 other employees got their stolen wages back. Kyle stepped down as CEO. The company brought in an outside manager to oversee operations while the audit proceeded. 3 months later, KL Logistics was sold to a regional competitor. Kyle's name wasn't on any of the paperwork. Janie never found out what happened to the FBI referral. Ruth said she'd passed the forensic report to a contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office, but federal cases moved slowly, and not everything that deserved prosecution got prosecuted. Sometimes justice was a settlement and a forced resignation. Sometimes it was just getting your name back. It would have to be enough. The day after the settlement was signed, Mara came to Janie's house. She brought groceries, real ones this time, not the apologetic offerings of that first visit, and they cooked together in Janie's kitchen. Nothing fancy. Spaghetti with meat sauce, garlic bread, a salad that Janie insisted on because Gerald had always insisted on vegetables with every meal. "I got a job offer," Mara said, stirring the sauce. "A real one. Compliance analyst at a healthcare company in Cleveland. They want someone who understands the human side of policy implementation." She smiled. "I think that's code for someone who's made mistakes and learned from them. Are you going to take it?" "I think so. The pay's decent. The benefits are good. And they have an actual IT department with actual redundancy." She looked at Janie. "I put you down as a reference. I hope that's okay." I'll tell them you're a pain in the ass who asks too many questions. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me." They ate at the kitchen table, the same spot where Janie had spread out the documents and the timelines and the evidence of Kyle's crimes. It looked different now. Smaller, somehow. Just a table. "What are you going to do?" Mara asked. "Now that it's over?" Janie thought about it. She'd been asking herself the same question for days. The freelance work was fine, but it wasn't a life. The settlement money would carry her for a while, but it wouldn't last forever. She was 63 years old, and the world was full of young people with MBAs and fresh certifications and the kind of energy she remembered having once, a long time ago. "I'm not sure," she said. "Maybe I'll consult. Help companies set up proper documentation, proper policies. The boring stuff that nobody wants to do until everything falls apart. You'd be good at that." "I've had practice." Janie set down her fork. "Or maybe I'll retire. Actually retire. Learn to garden. Read all the books I never had time for. Figure out what I want to do with 20 years of whatever comes next." "That sounds nice." "It sounds terrifying." Janie smiled. "But I've been terrified before. It's not a good enough reason to stop." Mara raised her water glass. "To not stopping. To not stopping." They clinked glasses. Outside, the March wind was blowing, but the sky was clear, and somewhere in the distance a cardinal was singing. Janie listened to it for a moment, thinking about Gerald, about endings and beginnings, about all the invisible labor that kept the world running until someone decided to notice. "They called me lazy," she said quietly, "because it was easier than admitting they'd built a business on work they couldn't see, on systems they didn't understand, on a woman who showed up every day and kept everything running and never asked for credit. And now the truth has room to breathe." Janie looked at Mara. "That's all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not money, just space for the truth. Was it worth it?" Janie considered the question. The sleepless nights, the legal fees, the fear, the anger, the long stretches of doubt when she'd wondered if she was fighting a war she couldn't win. The moment when she'd almost taken the settlement, almost walked away, almost let Kyle write the ending. "Yes," she said. "It was worth it." Mara nodded slowly. "My grandmother would have said you were stubborn. Your grandmother would have been right. She also would have said that stubborn people are the only ones who change anything." Janie laughed. It was a Real laugh this time, warm and tired and full of something that might have been peace. "Then I guess I'm in good company." They finished their dinner as the sun set over Columbus. Two women who had been enemies and become allies, who had been broken and become whole. The dishes went in the sink. The leftovers went in the fridge. And Janie walked Mara to the door, the same door she'd opened 3 weeks ago to find a stranger with a confession and a tote bag full of evidence. "Stay in touch," Janie said. "I will." Mara hesitated. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being worth not giving up on." Mara disappeared into the evening. Janie closed the door and stood in her quiet house, listening to the silence. Gerald's recliner was empty. The photos on the mantel were unchanged. The world was exactly the same as it had been that morning, and completely different. She walked to the kitchen and began washing the dishes. Tomorrow, there would be decisions to make, paths to choose, a life to figure out. But tonight, there was just this: warm water, clean plates, and the knowledge that she had carried something heavy for a long time, and finally set it down. The cardinals sang outside her window. Janie listened, and smiled, and let herself rest.